I'm talking like this right now because it's all being recorded for YouTube, and then I just leave it that way. One of these days I'll start editing the recordings for YouTube, but it won't be tonight. I'll tell you that for free. So I do a little intro. So what's going to happen is that we're going to hang out for about 4 minutes, just zip to 4 minutes ahead when the time seems right, and I will start the actual show. In the meantime, hi everybody who's tuning in, which is hopefully some people, and let me know how your week's going, and thanks for being here. I'm joined tonight by Sarah and Candice Beckham-Chasnoff, who will be my live in studio audience. Make some sort of sound. There we are. Yay! So I will be. So if I'm interacting with someone, that's why. And among that, hello, Auntie Isla. How you? Oh, that's you, Jenna. I can tell from the photo. Thanks for being here. How you doing? Let me know how you're doing. So it's broadcasting to Twitch. Say, Beckham Chasnoff, are either of you watching it on YouTube, or are you got it up on Twitch?
We have it on YouTube.
And is it in fact broadcasting?
It is.
Okay, I've got a new laptop, everybody, and anything could happen because technology is chaos. We've all been doing this sort of thing for a year and a half, and none of us are the slightest bit better at it. I can't help but notice, and so that's amazing. But yeah. But thanks for being here. Thanks for coming. We'll get started in about 3 minutes here, and it'll be fun. So now you, the Beckham Chasnoff's here. Oh, hello. Oh, look at all these people. Hi, it's working on YouTube. Hi. Thank you for commenting, Sarah. You can talk to me at this point.
I'm too busy saying hi to Cedius on Twitch.
Oh, yes, very good. The sound is a little tinny. I don't think there is anything I can do about that because there is no reason for that on my end. I have a new laptop, and so I don't. But I am recording through the same camera and mic that I always have. So unless it's recording through the laptop in some way I don't understand, I'm sorry that it's tinny. I will go ahead and take a look at that. I will not take a look at that in the next 2 minutes. So I'm sorry if the sound is tinny, but hopefully you can still hear my voice. And there's really nothing else to hear. I mean, the Beckham Chasnoffs will be making some sounds as well, but God willing, and but other than that, it's just my voice. I can be tinny for a second. Oh, thanks. And other people say you're wrong. So what are you gonna do about it? But it's so good to see all y'all here. Thank you for being here. It's not. Update all the drivers and get back to us in 5 minutes or 2 days. Yes, well, exactly. Yeah, no, new laptop. Hello, Heather Baldwin. Nice to see you. Thanks for being here. We'll get started in about in just about a minute here. Okay, good. Yeah, I'll check into that, but it will take some time, and I do not have any time. I got to do a show in a minute here. It's about H.G. Wells. So Beckham Chasnoff, do you know anything about H.G. Wells? You kind of don't, do you? We talked about it.
Some.
Oh, okay, very good.
Yeah.
Oh, very nice. Okay, what have you read?
I can't name it. You named one the other day, and I've read that.
Bet. War of the Worlds
World.
is his most famous. I would say his second most famous is Island of Dr Moreau. It's my favorite of his. Invisible Man, actually, that might be might be more famous. Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah.
Well, add your favorite to my list.
What's that? Oh, yes.
Add your favorite to my list.
Yes, I have several copies of it just right here behind me right now. But let's see. That's 802. Time Machine.
Yes.
Says Feel Bad Rainbow.
I've read that.
Also important. Yes, very good. Well, let's talk about them, shall we? I've written a little thing. Hi, everyone. I'm Reverend Matt, and today we're going to talk about the creatures of the books of H.G. Wells, pictured. New laptop. Everything is terrible. Today, we are going to talk about the creatures of H.G. Wells, pictured here. Or not, because something is horribly... Oh, I figured it out. Thank you for your patience, everyone. I am a foolish person. All right. Hi! I'm Reverend Matt, and today we're going to talk about the creatures of the books of H.G. Wells, pictured here. And here as well, played by Nick Cave in an upcoming feature film, and probably you can't even tell which is which because all white people look exactly alike. Now, Wells is famous for being the founder of science fiction, which is true because Mary Shelley never existed, and Jules Verne wrote in some sort of incomprehensible moonman language and hence absolutely does not count. Of course, Wells did not invent science fiction. As early as the 2nd century of the modern era, Lucian of Samosata, who was apparently constantly sort of bemused, wrote a story about a trip to the moon. But Wells invented, or at least popularized, countless modern science fiction tropes: alien invasion, time travel, humans given incredible powers by science, hybridization of human and animal. So four science fiction tropes. By countless, I meant four. I'm joking, of course, there are more, but we will get to them each in their turn. As is usual for my more creator-based talks, I will not focus overmuch on the man himself, because H.G. Wells was a human, and I just hate those so much. But there are two things that it is important to know about him. The first is that he was a student of biology, studying under Thomas Henry Huxley, the man known as Darwin's bulldog. He was called this because of his scrunched face and his inability to give birth without surgery. Or no, he was called this because he was the man who got the work of the generally retiring and humble Charles Darwin out into the world. He was evolution's champion and popularizer. And with evolution came the propagation of the idea that humanity was an animal, subject to the same natural forces that shaped and guided every other living thing, that we were part of the world as a whole and not some magical pinnacle of creation that is just so much better than everything else. Humanity, as the pinnacle of creation, was heretofore more or less the default in the West. For some time in Europe, it was believed that everything in the natural world existed for the specific and entire purpose of providing Christian moral instruction. And certainly humanity was always considered divine and the standard by which all else should be judged. I find this depressing. I mean, don't get me wrong, I like humans. I have a human friend. Without humans, there wouldn't be any Thundercats cartoons, and that would be unacceptable. But humans are the animals that have wrecked the animal that has wrecked the entire planet, and I just can't live with us being the pinnacle of existence. Neither could H.G. Wells, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. His first story with an unusual creature in it was 1894's Apiornis Island, cashing in on the wildly popular 1890s Apiornis fad, which of course has continued to this day. So, okay, alright. An Apiornis, also called an elephant bird, is a 10-foot tall flightless bird that once inhabited Madagascar, going extinct around the 11th century. It laid the largest eggs ever known, larger even than those of the much huger dinosaurs, with a volume of about 150 chicken eggs, which means that you would need a pan 150 times larger than the usual one to make an omelet out of it, but this is worth it, because sometimes you are just hungry for 150 times more omelet than usual. And it is just such an egg that starts off Apiornis Island. A sailor is shipwrecked with one, and lacking the giant pan or giant croissant that he could do something with, he allows the egg to hatch, and he and the Apiornis chick become the best of friends. A few pages later, this is a short story, the Apiornis grows up and starts attacking him, because actual nature does not want to be friends with you. It helps that in the original illustrations for the story, the Apiornis is drawn to resemble a cassowary. Nature may not want to be friends with you, but cassowaries are somewhat unusual among animals in that what they want the most is to beat you to death. So, a story about an extinct flightless bird named prominently in its title, a story for science enthusiasts, certainly. It bears mentioning that science enthusiasts were rather a larger voting bloc in 1890s Britain than they are now. This was a time and place when science was ascendant, when science was going to solve all of the world's problems, rather than a time and place when people weren't going to let a bunch of science eggheads make them survive a pandemic. Which does bring us, in a way that certainly makes me pray for death, to Wells' other 1894 short story, The Stolen Bacillus. In this story, a bacteriologist is visited by an anarchist who steals a cholera bacillus from him in order to infect himself with it and then release it onto an unsuspecting public, presumably while cackling. Anarchists did a lot of this sort of thing in those days, or to put it another way, no, they sure didn't. There was an active anarchist movement around then, but it was in fact a system of political thought with proposals for a new organization of society, at least as well thought out as some modern ones. But due to calls for violent revolution and other bad PR moves, they came to be regarded as evil, like the Joker. But I've strayed off topic. It turns out that the anarchist in The Stolen Bacillus has not stolen cholera at all, but rather accidentally stolen a new sort of disease that turns its sufferer blue. So it is predicted that he will be rounded up easily enough, and presumably there's some sort of light comic music sting. So it's another story mostly appealing to biology enthusiasts, like Wells himself. But in his next story, With Unusual Creatures, we get the other important thing to understand about this author. He was very dedicated to being a social commentator with big ideas on the nature of society and just what exactly everybody is doing wrong. He would become entirely dedicated to this later in life, but in his early science fiction days, he started with the 1895 novel The Time Machine. Now, this, of course, is where we get the modern science fiction concept of time travel, and indeed the word time machine, which out of this context would probably just mean a clock. So, without this book, we would not have Doctor Who. This is the sort of Doctor Who I care about, and so that's what you're getting. Or Back to the Future, or Bill and Ted, or the Pac-Man cartoon episode Journey into the Pac Past, and that is a world in which I do not want to live. Some of you think I am making up the Pac-Man episode, Journey into the Pac Past, but you give me too much credit. I haven't got what it takes. Journey into the Pac Past. The Pac Past. Hold that in your mind for as long as you are safely able. But time travel is not the only science fiction idea brought to the fore in this book. It is also an early work of what would come to be called speculative evolution, essentially creature design based on evolutionary principles. And here we see a future evolution of humanity. What you've got to understand is that this book is not like modern time travel stories where the protagonist goes back in time to kill Hitler or become their own grandparent or teach black people about rock and roll. No. Instead, almost all of the action of this novel occurs during a single trip forward to the year 802,701 AD. Now, in 2021, we of course understand that in 800,000 years' time, what will change is that Wi-Fi will be 115% faster than it is now, and that the Star Wars movies will be released directly to angry internet comments. But in the simpler days of 1895, the time traveler arrives in a transformed world. The planet appears to be a garden, immaculately kept and without large animals or irritating insects, and it is inhabited by the Eloi, descendants of humans who are 4 feet tall, pale, baby-faced, and possessed of soft, blonde heads of curly hair. In the future, all of humanity becomes miniature Peter McNichols, as we all knew it must. But these are no future supermen. Instead, the Eloi, while gentle, are degenerated, indolent, simple-minded, and with no attention span. And this is all a bit on the nose, Wells. The time traveler puts this all down to their mastery of their world, the weakness that comes from paradise. But later he learns the truth. Beneath the surface of the planet lives a second species of descendants of humanity, the Morlocks. Pale and ape-like, with lidless gray-red eyes and hair running down their backs, the Morlocks run the underground machinery that keeps the garden planet going, and they do this because at night they come up to the surface and collect Eloi to eat. The Eloi's passivity has led them to become herd animals. Well, obviously this is no good, and just as obviously what we have here is a social metaphor, with the wealthy and privileged degenerating into idiocy and frailty, and the literal underclass degenerating into literally devouring other human descendants and running the world after their fall. A parable of the class divide and its consequences, terrifying for the upper class, which I guess you were supposed to care about. I myself cannot even imagine. But the Morlocks aren't exactly aspirational themselves, and beyond its class warfare symbolism, this is Wells' first story of evolution, and about how evolution doesn't care about the noble virtues humanity likes to assign itself. Indeed, this book is punctuated at the end by the traveler going 30 million years into the future to an unrecognizable, dying Earth, inhabited mostly by crab-like creatures and any trace of humanity long extinct. Like the time of the Eloi and the Morlocks, this is played for horror, but then the vanity of humanity may be the only thing in the universe that is genuinely infinite, and it can maybe take some criticism. Wells did another social parable in 1895, the short novel The Wonderful Visit. This was not an example of his already signature science fiction, but rather a light supernatural story, almost a modern fairy tale, if more fairy tales were biting criticism of contemporary British society. In this, an angel falls to earth, though he is not an angel from heaven, but rather from the land of dreams, which is populated by unicorns and mermaids and stuff like that, and which is also said to be where humans go when they dream. This, of course, implies that H.G. Wells himself, famed creator of The War of the Worlds and The Invisible Man and so on, mostly had dreams that resembled old Rainbow Bright cartoons, but there you have it. The angel himself is said to resemble the one from Tobias and the Angel in the British National Gallery, and he is, of course, horrified by what he finds on Earth, with no understanding of the necessity at all, to say nothing of the cruelty of such institutions as class division, the church, enforced labor, and so forth. Hiding his wings under his coat, he is nevertheless taken as a freak and treated very badly by humanity, and he diminishes with time, his bright wings fading and his spirit losing the will to live. These days, people coming from a magical land and not understanding why we're so mean and gross is a staple. But here again, Wells is inventing things. And here again, he strikes out at humanity, specifically Victorian the self-congratulatory arrogance of the Victorians and of humanity. But nowhere does he so thoroughly attack human vanity than in his 1896 novel, The Island of Dr Moreau. This is the story of a one Edward Prendick's sojourn, told in the first person, to the remote Pacific Noble's Isle, where a one Dr. Moreau is performing cruel vivisections, basically dissections or plastic surgeries only on the living and conscious, on animals. The island is also inhabited by people with odd features and strange bodily proportions, which Prendick eventually realizes to be those of animals, and he hence concludes that Moreau is giving humans animal features, that Moreau is a sort of latter-day scientific Circe, the Greek who turned men into pigs. This freaks Prendick right out because he is a crybaby. Me, I would like a prehensile tail, and thank you. So, this compels Moreau to explain himself. He is not, in fact, turning humans into animals, but rather rebuilding animals into humans. He is unable to rebuild the seat of the emotions in the brain, however, and so he is unsatisfied with any of his results, and he simply turns them loose in the jungle, where they have formed their own society through no real intervention of Moreau's own. Eventually, however, even what rebuilding of the brain Moreau has accomplished begins to break down, and the beast flesh creeps back, as we are told, and the beast folk revert to animalism in mind and then in body. They kill Moreau and leave Prendick to set himself adrift on the sea, eventually to find his way back to London, where Prendick can no longer gaze upon his fellow actual humans without being horrified at the beast he now perceives just beneath. Now, the beast folk in this story are not like Horace or Anubis or Joe Camel. Instead, it is possible to mistake them for human, albeit humans who are described as having shorter legs than their torsos in some cases, or pointed hairy ears, and so forth. Well, this may sound remarkably open and accepting of variation in humanity for the Victorians, but remember that this goes with the age of the sideshow, of human freak shows, quote unquote, put on display for the public amusement. So you could know that what you were looking at was human without having to think of it as, human. And they vary wildly, the beast folk do, as is common in vilified monstrousness. Angels all look the same, but every demon is different. And of course, this is all about the virtue of conformity and how terrible it is to not do that. And this is your first act of the show reminder that humans are the worst. Actually, I suppose it's like the fifth so far, but this is the H.G. Wells show, and humans are the worst is kind of his whole thing. One time he wrote a whole novel where humans were just base and vicious animals. It's this one. Anyway, in Moreau, the beast folk vary not only because that's what bad people do, but of course because they are based on various animals. And these animals give them their psychological traits based on a somewhat cartoony system of animal symbolism. The ape man thinks himself an intellectual. The cats are rebellious and vicious. A dog person is loyal, and so on. This goes further still with the beast folk who are built out of more than one animal. Prendick has an archenemy in a hyena swine man who is especially brutal and craven and at the same time intelligent. And the beast folk are led by the sayer of the law, whose animal components are unrecognizable in favor of just appearing as a mound of long gray hair, like Cousin It, only more well-spoken. Or less, depending on your needs. Please be advised that in my script I spelled Cousin It with 2 T's, as is proper and correct, in spite of the fact that none of you can hear it. I got a snap from Candice. Because that is my dedication to the facts, speaking generally, and also particularly where the Addams family is concerned. Remarkably, in the countless adaptations that Moreau has enjoyed or suffered over the years, these chimeric beast folk, ones made of more than one animal, are usually quietly dropped in favor of the usual cat people and duck people and so forth. Probably this is because a lot of the enduring appeal of Moreau is that of basic human-animal hybrids in general. It is the rare mythology that leaves them out. And of course they are wildly popular in children's cartoons. Animal people simply work. Though there are those that say the cartoon beast folk have been intentionally popularized in order to accustom impressionable children to a future full of such abominations of science. I've never heard anybody say this, but probably they have. So Wells took something inhuman and gave it human attributes, intelligent speech, manipulative limbs, and in doing so created an object of fear, largely through the breaking of the boundaries between things on which our orderly view of the universe depends. And he did this to tell a story about the human condition. Wells described this book later in life as an exercise in youthful blasphemy, which I myself accomplished by listening to a lot of Ozzy, rather than writing a classic modern novel. But to each their own, I suppose. For Moreau was about the inherent and unavoidable bestial nature of humanity, and the absurdity of its pretenses to civilization. The beast folk are slaves both to their animal instincts and to a nonsensical set of rules called the law, with such prohibitions as not to suck up drink, that is the law, are we not men? Not to claw bark of trees, that is the law, are we not men? And so on. Not valuable moral guidance, but arbitrary and useless rules like men should wear a strip of cloth around their necks on important occasions, or use a PowerPoint picture of a tie rather than just pointing to your own tie. These are rules. And of course, underneath this all is the animal's native savagery. Of course, we know in 2021 that everyone is basically decent and that no part of the population is going to suddenly revert to witless, violent fearfulness, but Wells paints a haunting picture just the same. Dr. Moreau himself has nothing to do with the formation of the law. Instead, it was instilled upon the beast folk by a Hawaiian missionary who had stayed on the island some years previously. For Moreau's part, he attributes any striving on the animal's part to be better than their animal natures as vanity, surplus curiosity, and waste sexual energy. Prendick simply pities happy beasts being made to experience the internal struggle of nature against nurture. But whatever Moreau's low opinion of the law may be, he does benefit from it. Accompanying the prohibitions is a section with admonitions such as, "His is the hand that heals, his is the great salt sea, his is the house of pain." If you don't know what this is, please, please, you should keep it that way. So, the law is not only general governance and tradition, but religion also, and in being so, religion is depicted as being every bit as absurd as the rest of it, which is of course ridiculous because real religion is always just super rational. I'm going to go back to famed 90s white rap group House of Pain. But if Moreau is a god, he is an uncaring one. He tells Prendick that he chose the human form as a thing to change animals into arbitrarily, and that he may just as well have turned llamas into sheep or vice versa. Me, I would turn everything into quokkas. Moreau is a deity of natural selection, of its impartial hand, and as such, these victims of enforced evolution are compelled to venerate him. And indeed, he dies later on, perhaps symbolic of the end of the usual sort of physical, natural selection for humanity, to be taken over by cultural evolution. That this has happened, physical evolution replaced by cultural evolution, is a truism for modern anthropology, but Wells, in his essays elsewhere, was one of its earliest proponents. He does stay true to his word, Moreau does, about his own arbitrariness, it should be noted. Some of his early experiments, nothing to do with humanity, still inhabit the island, including a species of pink, hopping, cat-sized creatures, and a huge, limbless, white worm-like thing, perhaps symbolic of the Serpent of Eden. Noble's Isle. Come for the grotesque human-animal hybrids, stay for the giant pale worm thing. As for Prendick, the outsider, he comes to Noble's Isle by a series of events entirely out of his control, and is generally buffeted about by the winds of chance throughout the story. He is only ever a victim of circumstance, and in the broad view of humanity on Earth we get from this book, so are we all. I would like to say, by the way, by way of personal advice, do please avoid the annotated Island of Dr. Moreau by Leon Stover. Stover believes that Moreau is meant to be the tragic hero of this story, the man who tried to create intelligence in a system hostile to it. Since Wells was not afraid of scientific abominations in the abstract himself, and since much of the point of this book is that human morality isn't what it's cracked up to be, this is not quite as ridiculous as it sounds. It is very flawed, though. First of all, Moreau transforms animals by means of vivisection to the sounds of their screaming over days and days, and though the protagonist of this story grows hardened by it, it is hardly good salesmanship on Wells's part. Second, as mentioned, many of the beast folk are made up of more than one beast: the hyena swine, a satyrish ape goat, a fox bear, and so on. And though turning an animal into a person is a potentially comprehensible idea, sewing a horse to a rhino and then turning that into a person is somewhat harder to justify. Also, Stover concludes his annotations with a quote about how the secret primary agenda of the entire political left is literally, specifically, global totalitarianism. He quotes Wells saying that humanity's story is a race between education and catastrophe, and suggests that this is terrible because all education is totalitarian indoctrination. Look, I've wandered off topic, but Leon Stover is a libertarian, and don't give him any money. That's it. That's all. But do read The Island of Dr. Moreau. But do read The Island of Dr. Moreau if you get a chance. It's a fascinating indictment of human society through the lens of evolution, which Wells understands quite well for his time, by the way. The beast folk give birth to normal animals of their sorts, whereas for most of the 19th century, it had been believed that offspring inherited the acquired traits of their parents. The first major disproof of this had only come in 1893, when an August Wiseman cut the tails off of mice and bred them and showed that all of the baby mice had tails. He did this to 1,592 mice. So, if you have had any reason to cut the tails off of 1,592 mice, it has already been taken care of. Don't do that. I'm wandering again. This book is a brilliant indictment of humanity. It is more or less the origin of the nature-nurture debate in modern society. It is a well-written ripping yard besides, and also leopard people are rad. Another sort of non-human but humanoid intelligence appeared in Wells' 1896 short story In the Abyss. Here a sort of spherical diving bell is invented and tested, diving bell being a sort of thing that hadn't been invented yet. Wells had a gift for this sort of prediction, as we will be seeing yet more of later. And its operator sinks to the bottom of the ocean. There he is soon approached by a figure walking along the seafloor that is roughly humanoid, purple in color, with a head like a chameleon's, only with protruding gills. It has frog-like arms and legs and rests on its heavy tail in a tripod-like arrangement. It makes bellowing sounds, and then the diving bell is rolled to its city, which is lit by phosphorescence and where the buildings have no ceilings. There, these abyssal intelligences collect the bones and human artifacts that drift down to them from the unknown above, where they venerate them. There's even a priest with robes and a diadem. Anyway, the protagonist gets his diving bell working again, and he goes back to the surface, and he's all like, boy, that was weird. It's not really a story driven by what you'd call conflict. But that's not really the sort of story this is. It's more of a think piece. What if humanity was not only not the pinnacle of creation, but not even the only civilization on Earth right now? It also very much appears to be the story that set off the entire Fishman thread in modern horror, including H.P. Lovecraft's Deep Ones and The Creature from the Black Lagoon, a creature from a black and white film who was always colorized at the time as having really full red kissable lips. Which does, of course, bring us to The Shape of Water, which really is a heartbreakingly wonderful film, and so I'm not going to make any jokes about fish sex, except for this joke here about not making any jokes about fish sex. Also from 1896, and completely different from these, is The Plattner Story, probably Wells' first proper ghost story, because if you were a writer of speculative fiction in Victorian England and you didn't write any ghost stories, you would of course be arrested. Still, Wells was all about making stuff up, and so this is a story about a mysterious green powder exploding and sending the story's protagonist into another world with different topography from Earth's and with a green sun. It is inhabited by the Watchers of the Living, which appear as floating, big-eyed heads of dead people with dangling tadpole tails, most with looks of overwhelming remorse on their faces. What does this mean? This means it's time to get all the way out of here. That's what this means. Which, luckily, our protagonist does, returning to the world of the living. So it's structurally very like Into the Abyss, though I do feel that just getting away from these things is narrative conflict enough, and I would like to thank speculative fiction writers since Wells for not making this a subgenre unto itself. The final 1896 story that suits tonight's purpose is The Sea Raiders, which features a fictional species of squid, Haploteuthis ferox, described as having bodies the size of a good-sized swine. Perhaps you are not familiar with which sizes of swine are the good ones, but suffice it to say they are probably pretty hefty. Basically, in this story, Haploteuthis suddenly develop a taste for human flesh and start coming up to the surface and killing people, and then later they stop again, just as suddenly and with just as little explanation. Not at all satisfying from an American know-how walk away from the explosion without even looking at it point of view. But that is, of course, the point. Nature is huge and scary and arbitrary and outside of our control. We are not its masters. If they made a movie of it today, they would get it completely wrong. 1897's Wells science fiction novel was The Invisible Man. This is the story of a scientist named Griffin who has, previous to the beginning of the story, discovered the principle of the refractive index, which is described in terms of it being the thing that makes water or glass transparent and other things opaque. There isn't a refractive index, that is not a thing, but in 1897 maybe it was, and anyway at least Wells tried to make things happen for a reason of some sort. Griffin has used this knowledge to turn himself permanently invisible, He retreats to the countryside to continue his experiments and concludes that, since he can't make other things invisible at will, like his clothing or anything he picks up, or make himself intangible or silent or any of that, there is only one thing that invisibility is good for, and that thing is murder. Some might feel that he could have thought about it a little harder. But he invented human invisibility, so he's probably pretty smart. He decides, therefore, to use his abilities as an ultimate assassin to go on a reign of terror. In so many words, a reign of terror, declaring himself Invisible Man the First. He is instead killed by an angry mob. The end. This is, of course, a parable of identity, or rather its absence, making people become totally reprehensible. And of all the things Wells predicted, his foresight here of the effects of internet anonymity is perhaps the most uncanny. The Invisible Man is a literary descendant of the philosopher Plato's Ring of Gyges, a magical ring of invisibility that, in Plato's thought experiment, potentially turns people into giant tools by way of turning them invisible. It is worth remarkable, then, that Griffin does not appear to go through any transformation of character in this book, rather seeming to have always been a D-bag, visible or otherwise. Perhaps, then, we see here a consideration not of the effects of anonymity, but the implications of desiring it. It may also be worth remarking that the Invisible Man, as basically a human granted a superpower by science, is no more a monster by my usual definition than is Spider-Man or Captain America. But he is one of the central pantheon of the Universal Studios monster movies, and so basically he gets in because he knows a guy. The Invisible Woman is my favorite member of the Fantastic Four. This is relevant to none of this. Also in 1897, there's one of his weakest stories with creatures in it, a story of the Stone Age, in which a caveman runs around getting into fights and inventing the axe, and also inventing riding horses, and then later, I don't know, the Roman Arch, and Super Smash Brothers, probably. The animals of England from 50,000 years ago are a decently accurate collection in this story, though Wells does mix in tropical forms, hippos and such, with woolly rhinos and mammoths and cave bears and European lions, and though woolly rhinos and modern African-style rhinos did live in prehistoric Britain, they didn't do it at the same places and times. Wells may have been aware of this, but this is generally not a narrative. This story is generally not a narrative in which he what's the word I'm looking for? Tries. Instead, writing what was even then a run-of-the-mill caveman story, because presumably someone had a loved one of his hostage to be freed once he wrote a caveman story. These days, there's a whole division of police in most cities just for that. Wells is much more back in form in The Star, also from 1897, which is about a rogue star passing through our solar system and very close to Earth, which wreaks untold and disastrous ecological havoc across the globe, which is nothing to do with monsters. Except for the end, when an astronomer on Mars observes that the Earth is largely unchanged by the passing, save for melting of the ice at the poles. It's perspective again. It's the tininess of humanity's concerns again. Wells was into this. Perhaps it comforted him, as it does many people, myself included, to think that the universe was bigger, so much bigger, than all of our god-awful petty concerns. But whatever his reasoning for wanting you to consider the irrelevance of humanity, perhaps he was also just a jerk, his Martian astronomer serves this purpose here with economy, remarking and disappearing, undescribed. Perhaps a clue to the Martian's appearance may be found in the same year's The Crystal Egg, in which a crystal egg is found and turns out to be a sort of hypertech palantir, but one not controlled by a guy who is sort of weirdly sadistic about forestry, but by Martians. People from Mars! And so by using the egg, visions of Mars may be had. There are huge animals resembling dragonflies and moths there, as well as ape-like whitish bipeds, and the intelligent Martians made up of huge heads with two bunches of tentacles immediately below the mouth. The Martians are able to put on ribbed wings to fly about, and we'll be seeing them again shortly. Indeed, we'll be seeing them in a way that might explain why they're using Palantirs to look at Earth here. This is an unusual, though very uncertain, instance of crossover between two Wells stories. Though, of course, these days you can't watch a single episode of any new TV show without several hundred man-hours of previous media consumption allowing it to make any sense. And this crossover is, of course, with Wells' most famous piece, the 1898 novel *The War of the Worlds*. Small round of applause for War of the Worlds. Please do this in your homes as well. Flashes of light are seen on Mars, and then huge metal cylinders crash into England west of London, and then huge mechanical tripods rise from them and march east, scattering humanity in their wake and collecting some specimens of us. Their operators, the octopod Martians, feed by taking our blood and injecting it directly into their own cardiovascular systems. The narrative consists mostly of the first-person protagonist observing all of this and wandering the ruins of human society as it falls entirely apart. In the end, famously, the Martians are defeated not by any human agency whatsoever, but by ordinary Earth disease. This story invented, for all intents and purposes, the alien invasion narrative, which is a big one. To this day, when most U.S.-born Americans think of the word invasion, they think of this: flying saucers crashing into the Capitol building. We have to think of aliens for invasion purposes because, of course, the 50 states as we know them have never been invaded, really, except for that one time, and that, of course, was by the people of many of us watching this. Now, we could tell stories about that, or about invasions in other countries, but in order for those to land emotionally, it would require empathy, and that's impossible, so aliens it is. And War of the Worlds invented many other things besides. The Martians attack with heat rays, reminiscent of the lasers, which would later become the only way to ever hurt anyone in science fiction, so essential to weaponry that they would make swords out of them in defiance of all of how lasers work. The Martians attack in tripods, walking machines, presaging the AT-ATs, and if War of the Worlds did nothing for us at all, it at least paved the way for the AT-ATs, and AT-ATs are the best. Fact. The Martians attack with poison gas, and before the end, they are in the process of building a flying machine, a mechanism as yet unknown in the real world. The Martians hadn't arrived here in flying machines, remarkably, but rather in cylinders shot out of giant guns, which sounds like a stupid way of getting from one planet to another, but then I don't see you having any ideas. Well, any good ones. It has been remarked that the two primary conveyances of the Martians are metal cylinders and tripods, and if you put these together, that's a telescope. And I don't know whether that's awesome or silly, so I'm going to go with awesome. Wells himself, by the way, believed that the airplane would eventually be invented, but that it would have no significant effect on global culture and economy. Because nobody bats 1,000. He did predict that everyone would have to take off their shoes before getting on one, though. Wells did not invent Martians. The idea that Mars might be inhabited predated him handily. Indeed, in 1890, a French newspaper offered a reward of 100,000 francs, in American money, $1.33, to the first person to make extraterrestrial contact, with the exception of that contact being with Mars, because that would be too easy. Another thing that was widely believed about Mars was that it was old. Its deserts were those of an ancient, dying planet. How exactly this worked varied. According to one school of thought, the planets were thrown off of the forming sun in turn, and thus the farther out they were, the older they were. In another version, since Mars was smaller than Earth, it aged more quickly, which is how that sort of thing worked when you've decided that science is just whatever you make up. But in any case, Venus was covered in clouds, and we didn't know that they were clouds of sulfuric acid, so we assumed it was just extra rainy, and therefore Venus was primordial, Mars was ancient and dying, and we were in between. And Wells ran with this concept. His Martians invaded because their world was out of resources, and they themselves were little more than huge heads with an array of tentacles, nothing more than a brain and hands. This, to Wells, was the direction that humanity was heading. Our own evolution was heading to the entirely cerebral, plus the retention of manipulators. He wrote a whole essay to this effect elsewhere, in which he also mentioned that we would modify our bodies intentionally, a prediction of what is now called transhumanism, which has yet to come to pass. But if it does in my lifetime, I would like to look like this, please. And that we would become progressively worse. And he predicted that we would become progressively worse at holding our liquor, which is maybe not something I would feel like including in my essay on human evolution, but some people have different concerns than mine. The Martians are even entirely dependent and possibly in mental control of their machinery. They even presage cyborgs, therefore, and hence Robocop, who is part man, part machine, all, I forget, something cool. The narrator of the book goes so far as to refer to the tripods as Martians, the brain and the giant metal body being one, especially with the basic Martian being little more than a brain. As an aside, talking of tripods, some commentators have pointed out that 3 legs is just never an efficient walking mechanism. There's just nothing to do with the third that makes anything better. There is an answer to this, however, and that answer is, say it with me, shut up. Shut your filthy mouth. The tripods are completely amazing, and the more so because of the manner of their introduction. It is storming when they first appear, and they are first seen in the light of flashes of lightning, a strobing sort of effect. Overall, Wells is a very powerful but fairly straightforward writer, but when he decides to go for serious dramatic imagery, he brings his A game. And so the Martians are future humanity, weak but huge-brained, which of course became a standard template for aliens ever since, most hostile in the same manner as these first entities from the planet named for the god of war, appealing essentially to the American anti-intellectual streak. No, seriously, there's an American anti-intellectual streak. But sometimes less hostile, like when they have a little jazz combo. Wells' Martians have rarely been copied directly, though they have been depicted by such luminaries as Ray Harryhausen and Edward Gorey. And there's a whole Gorey illustrated edition of War of the Worlds, and if you need to stop listening to me now so that you can go find it online for purchase, then I understand. Humanity in this novel comes off rather poorly, once again. It is frequently compared to various species of animal in its panic before the Martians, and of course, Wells just went on and on about this everywhere, and I imagine he was a lot of fun at parties. I make gentle sport, but I'm easily a million times worse. His first-person narrator's 2 companions are a curate, who represents the pathetic absurdity of religion, and an artilleryman who does the same for the survivalist types. And society in general collapses almost instantly, and without fanfare, everyone just watching helplessly as the curtain seems to be rung down on civilization itself. If they'd had the internet under these circumstances, of course, they could have gotten onto it and yelled at each other about it constantly, and we must have pity on them that they could not do so. This is a story about reactions to the apocalypse, and those reactions are helpless panic and turning to useless, pointless ideals. And so the War of the Worlds is a story about the great destroying the small. The British military, the greatest in the world at the time, manages to destroy a single tripod that we see, but this only puts into harsh relief its overall uselessness. This sort of total war, this war of absolute destruction, was not fully real at this time in history, though of course it is now, making it yet another of Wells' accurate predictions. And Mr. Wells, Herbert, maybe you could lay off the predicting things for like a minute. In the 1953 movie, updated to then current America, they dropped some atomic bombs on the Martian vehicles, and their emergence completely unscathed is one of the most powerful parts of a movie that is well made, but with its square-jawed heroes and Jesus-iness rather entirely misses the point of the original novel. That point being that there could easily be things in this universe that are greater than we are. That we are, again, not the most glorious thing in all of creation. It has been likened to the works of H.P. Lovecraft in their incomprehensibly powerful alien entities, and rightly so, albeit with less cloying, repetitive, cutesy jokes. There is a more grounded level of this theme at work here, though. 1898 was on the heel of decades of British imperialism, the most technologically advanced army on Earth, destroying people around the world who simply did not have the equipment to offer real resistance. Not wars, but slaughters. And, as it is put in the very first chapter of the book, And before we judge them, the Martians, too harshly, we must remember what ruthless and utter destruction our own species has wrought. The Tasmanians were entirely swept out of existence in a war of extermination waged by European immigrants in the space of 50 years. Are we such apostles of mercy as to complain if the Martians warred in the same spirit? Turnabout is fair play. Maybe you're okay with exterminating the less technologically advanced, but if so, screw you. But that still only works if the most technologically advanced is you. And War of the Worlds puts the imperial nation of Earth on the other end. It's a poor substitute for actual empathy. But then, in empathy's absence, I suppose something will have to do. The War of the Worlds is, of course, H.G. Wells' most famous work, a major cultural touchstone all its own. I could perhaps do a whole show just about it and its various cinematic and, of course, radio drama versions, and perhaps someday I will. But it was also the end of an era for Wells. By 1901, just 3 years after this, he was fully shifting away from genre fiction and focusing on writing about his social ideas, which were well-meaning. Like most misanthropes, he thought humanity could do better. But his version of this included a good bit of one-world government and suppression of deviance, up to and including eugenics, and it's a bad mess, and he dedicated his life in the 20th century to it, up to his death in 1946. And he is remembered by history as a 19th century science fiction writer, and that's good. That's fine. Still, he got a few last creatures stories in, though none up to his former glory. In 1898, the same year as War of the Worlds, he published the short The Stolen Body. In this, a man learns to astrally project, and he finds that the astral plane is a dark world full of leering, floating faces. Not the horrid tadpole ghosts of the Plattner story, but just full-on inhuman evil spirits. One takes over the man's now vacant body and rampages through London, attacking stuff whilst yelling, "Life! Life!" Which is not what I would do if I had control of someone's body. I mean, what I would do if I had control of someone's body is sit very still and wait for it to be over, both because controlling someone's body is a nightmare worst-case scenario in the concept of consent, and because sitting very still is just something that I generally enjoy. But if I was controlling someone's body with their consent, probably running around attacking everything while yelling, "Life, life," would be on the list no higher than number 3. 1901 brought The First Man in the Moon, a full novel in which a scientist invents basically a paint that is opaque to gravity, and so creates a sort of reverse diving bell and shoots himself and a companion to the moon. There they find a surprising amount of plant life and also snow, and visit the underground civilization of the Selenites, the intelligent race of the moon. Though it is an underground civilization, the reference in the title to being in the moon is not about this. Rather, the travelers are in the moon in much the same way that one might be in rural Texas for some reason. Some unfortunate reason. There's a lot of life on the moon, or in the moon, moon adjacent, whatever. There are the Rafas, which are just masses of tentacles. There are the Tsees, which are fast, unseen, darting predators, and an unnamed species of black, tentacled aquatic monsters. And there are moon calves, named after an old-timey word for the neurodivergent, which nicely accomplished both of the goals of an old-timey word for the neurodivergent, insulting people and making absolutely no sense whatsoever. Happily, Wells' huge, wormy domestic animals have nothing to do with any of this, and instead are named so because they are kind of like calves, and they are on the moon. Or in the moon. Damn it. I've been handed a drink, but I will drink it later, because I'm here to talk to you. And then there are the Selenites themselves. Vaguely humanoid insect creatures. They have expressionless faces and tentacles for hands resembling the tips of elephant trunks. But this is actually about all that can be said of them definitively, because the thing about Selenites is that they come in infinite varieties. There are laborers with huge, strong arms, messengers with very long legs, long-armed fishermen, and so on. And then, of course, there are the scholars and rulers who have huge, distended brains, up to the hugest, most distended and horrific brain of all, that of the ultimate head of state, the Grand Lunar. Much of the history of science fiction in the 20th century and 21st has featured embittered, nerdy intellectuals having transparent power fantasies about getting to be in charge, and H.G. Wells invented even that. Because the thing is, this about the Selenites is all good. We are presented with lunar society as good and advanced and admirable, which is fine enough on the surface of it, but the thing is, the Selenites haven't been stratified and organized by evolution, but rather by social engineering. They've been specifically bred into their various societal roles, and whatever physical and cerebral needs are required for their assigned tasks that are not given by this eugenic plan are provided by training and education and surgery. The narrator of this section sees young Selenites encased in bottles meant to mold their bodies into the shapes needed for their jobs. And he thinks this is great, calling it more humane than forcing young people into the ambiguity of deciding their roles in life for themselves. Now we're going to break up into small groups and discuss the problems with this. If your group would like to just scream at each other incoherently and ceaselessly, full credit will be awarded. So we're kind of losing Wells at this point. He has a few more monster stories in him, one a year for the next 4 years, and only one is really very good. 1902 is okay. The Inexperienced Ghost, his first straight ghost story with a regular ghost in it, though, God bless him, he still does refuse to conform to the conventions of the endlessly repeated Victorian ghost story. Instead, it's a satire, with its wraith just terrible at his job, actually saying boo to people, and of course scaring nobody, and somebody asking if he was even murdered in the house he haunts. Look, there's a right way and a wrong way to do this. He is embarrassing everyone, frankly. It's a gag that has been done to death since then, but there's a freshness to it here nevertheless that makes it nicely readable, and at least Wells is still just being a writer here. 1903's Valley of the Spiders was a fantasy short in which travelers in an ill-defined low-tech world are assailed by spiders that have built jellyfish-like balloons out of their webs and fly about in them, carried by the wind. And that is no good, but things turn out okay. And once more, again, Wells has invented an entire genre, that of fantasy with spiders building jellyfish-like balloons out of their webs. 1904 was The Food of the Gods, which was another full novel, but I'm not going to talk about it as much as I have the other full novels here because it is not very good. Also, First Men on the Moon at least had a lot of bizarro insect dudes, whereas food here only gets mentioned because a dietary supplement is invented that causes the generation after its consumers to grow gigantic, including giant chickens and giant rats. And there is a bit with a giant rat that is pretty scary, but the book isn't really about this, but rather focuses on the giant human children who have come about. And now, it's metaphor time. Everyone ready for metaphor time?
Yes.
Excellent. Then we'll begin. The children are bigger than their parents because the next generation is literally greater than the one that came before. It's lovely. Like I said, Wells meant well, if you'll pardon the term. But his writing is getting a bit ham-fisted. Luckily, though, his final creature story, 1905's Empire of the Ants, is a solid bookend. It's another short concept piece. People in South America start encountering a new species of ant, inches long and tool-using and organized by centaurish, giant-brained leader ants, and these are beginning to move against humanity, attacking us with manufactured poison and actually commandeering our ships. And it is a story that contains the line, "He had suddenly discovered the insignificance of man." Oh, H.G. Wells. It's good to have the old you back. You may have been a bit of a misanthrope, but you understood that the world was much bigger than humanity and that this was beautiful, that the grand vistas of science were an opening of wondrous possibilities. And you brought so many of those possibilities to life. Thank you. And thank you all for watching. And thank you to the Beckham-Chasnoff for being here with me. Thank you all so much. If you liked it, then then tell people to follow. You probably already follow me on the social media, but tell other people to follow me on the social media. I'm on all of them. There's RevMats Monster Science. There's all the things. There's a Threadless store, monsterscience.threadless.com. There's Patreon, patreon.com/monsterscience, where I have 44 followers, and once I get 50, I will start work on the Monster Science Cartoon Tarot. which will be offered at a discount to Patreon members. I won't be able to offer it for free because it's super expensive to do those things. So check out the Threadless, check out the Patreon, and also if you're not on the Patreon or not getting on the Patreon, then artists should be paid for their work, in my opinion. So do please donate. If you're watching on Twitch, there should be a donate button just below. I'm my email on PayPal or Matthew Kesson on Venmo. So please donate if you can, because I work hard. So thank you all so much. Beckham-Chasnoff, do you have any questions, any comments? They're here in my house, so they get first pick. Do you have any questions, any comments, anything you want to say about H.G. Wells after all that I just said?
No questions, but I'm really impressed by what you said about the Invisible Man and the allegory to the internet. I just have to think that's really interesting.
Well, yeah, I mean that's that's what the internet is a bunch of people whose faces you don't see taking advantage of their anonymity by taking advantage of anonymity in order to become giant d-bags. Yeah. And like I say, Wells is sort of the modern thing about invisible d-baggery, but Plato's Ring of Gyges was what if people were invisible? Probably they'd be tools. Yeah. So it's a fascinating thing. So yeah. No questions, says Jay. But yay, thank you very much, Jay. Yeah. Any questions about all of that? I may need to excuse the Beckham-Chasnoff soon, but yeah, I can take a few questions. Thank you all for being here. So lovely to see you all. It is a super. Oh, here's another thing. It is an insane busy month for me. I am on October 9th. I am doing a show at. I'm doing my second show at Bryant Lake Bowl, and this is Mermaids and Mythology and Me, which is a crossover with the legendary local storyteller Ariel Pinkerton. I'm very excited about that, so you should come and see that. And that'll be proof of vaccination required. Everything's proof of vaccination required. On the 14th, I'll do my monthly show here, which will be Frankenstein D-Bag, my Frankenstein show, which I have not live streamed yet. 21st, 23rd, and 24th, I'm doing the Twin Cities Horror Festival online. I'm doing a show called The Root of All Evil on those 3 nights, so that'll be good, and that'll be sort of donate and pay what you can. So that's lovely. And then I haven't got the contract yet, but on the 28th, I'm going to go over to Strike Theater and do another in-person show where I will do my Victorian. My Scream Punk What Victorians Were Scared Of show, the history of Victorian horror, and that will again be in person, and has received a round of applause. So yeah, I think there was a question. Your favorite artistic interpretation of a monster? That is a giant question. I mean, I include. For purpose of Reverend Matt's Monster Science, I include prehistoric animals as monsters because they don't exist anymore. And my favorite piece of art period is involves a prehistoric animal, and it's by an artist called Douglas Henderson. And I don't even know what it's called, but look up Douglas Henderson Mosasaur Meteor, and it's a painting of Chicxulub, the meteor that was the nemesis of the dinosaurs, surging terrifyingly through the atmosphere while the mosasaur, which is an aquatic reptile, is breaching like a dolphin in the front, enjoying its life in spite of the fact that apocalypse is coming. And it's I don't know, it's a beautiful symbol as far as I'm concerned. So that is my favorite piece of art that has what for my purposes is a monster in it. So thank you very much for asking. So yeah, any further questions? Anything else? Yeah, yes. Candice Beckham-Chasnoff.
More than one copy of the Island of Dr Moreau?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The Leon Stover one. I have a lovely little box of paperbacks of a bunch of H.G. Wells, and there's an Island of Dr Moreau in that. The Leon Stover one that I was complaining about is upstairs right now, and I set it on fire in front of you, but it's upstairs. And then I actually and she did not. This is an honest question on her part, but this is actually super interesting. This is the Island of Dr. Moreau for the 1970. There have been 3 major films of Island of Dr. Moreau. One in 1933 called Island of Lost Souls. One in 1970 something or other involving Burt Lancaster, and then the famous one with Val Kilmer and old what's his name, Godfather. Marlon Brando. Yeah. All three of them are terrible. All in interestingly different ways. The 1970s Island of Dr Moreau is uniquely among the three of them terrible in being boring. You will believe that a scientific station creating human animal hybrids is dull, and which is a hell of a thing. But then the other hell of a thing is that this is the novel attached to it, and what happens is that the first half of the book is H.G. Wells' Island of Dr. Moreau, and the second half of the book is somebody writing a novelization of the movie, which is testicles the size of church bells, as far as I'm concerned. What are you out of your goddamn mind? I'm gonna read the H.G. Wells, and then I'm gonna read your thing. Holy crap! So I've actually never read the second half of it. I know it's there. One of these days I have to, but yeah, but no, this is 70. This is an old used book. So yeah, how dare you? But and one of these days I'll read it, but that day has not yet come. Oh hey, news. Hey Asheville, how's things in Asheville? Okay, hold on. I'm a little behind. Just give me a second here. There is B. Arthur and Velociraptors. I don't know what that means. Thoughts on The Simpsons parody Island of Dr. Moreau and one of the Halloween segments. It's lovely. It's delightful. I mean, it's actually in a strange sort of way, in a way that many adaptations of Moreau, that these three adaptations of Moreau, kind of leave by the wayside, and that other sort of, like parodies and satires of it. Most parodies and satires do it, but the Simpsons do it especially well. Which is one of the things about Island of Dr. Moreau is that the dog man is loyal and the horsemen are kind of dumb and strong and all that sort of thing. And it very much, I mean, as scientific as it generally is, and as fairly straightforward as it is, it very much plays on fairly cartoony ideas of animal character, and the fact that The Simpsons Island of Dr. Moreau makes all of the characters some animal that is, a cartoony version of their Simpsons character is perfectly on the nose in a way that like the movies aren't. So I'm for that. So that's very neat. So yeah, those would be my thoughts on that. So that's lovely. I'm so glad you're watching from North Carolina, guys. Thank you so much. Any further questions? I mean, it takes a second. I mean, there's a lag. I know, so I'm going to give it a minute. I'm going to say any further questions. I'm going to wait for a minute or two, but yeah. Yeah, thanks for still being here. It's so nice to still do this. It's been fun. Actually, it's been since I did a monthly that I did my live show at BLE. I did an in person. I keep calling them live shows. This is live. We all know this is live, but everybody understands what I'm talking about. But I was on stage at BLB, and it was wonderful. It was so good. I love you. I love talking to you here. I love the comments, but I missed the laughing so much, and it was so good to have that from a crowd and to interact with the crowd. I mean, and again, thank you to the Beckham-Chasnoffs for laughing and giving me something to interact with here, and this lovely gin and tonic that they have poured me. Thank you. Yeah. My pleasure. Thank you all. Thank you all for being here. Monthly on the 14th. Come and see all these other damn shows. Look me up online for if you have somehow already forgotten all of this information about shows. Hello. Thanks so much, you guys.